The center channel when mixing Atmos. Let's talk about it. When it comes to the center channel, I feel like a lot of engineers either love it or hate it. I guess some are in between and maybe some are neutral, but a lot of engineers tend to really land on one side or the other. Personally, I've gone back and forth on how I feel about the center channel and using the center channel for mixing, but today I thought, hey, let's talk about the pros and cons of the center channel, and then I want to look at a couple of things regarding panning and doing things in the center and maybe some of the controls as they relate to the center channel. Just some things to think about and things for you to experiment and mess around with on your own. Let's start by talking about the pros to the center channel. What are the advantages of using the center channel? Putting something in the center channel is the best way to get really solid center imaging. When we use a phantom center image, you have to be sitting right between the speakers for it to work. The minute you kind of start going over to one side of the speakers, the image will shift closer to that speaker. And this is from the precedence effect or the Haas effect, whatever you want to refer to it. Another advantage with the center channel is you're going to get less intermodulation distortion. What is intermodulation distortion? Basically, when we start summing lots of things together in a speaker, we don't necessarily get the purest reproduction of those sources. So maybe another way to think about this is when we can distribute things in our mix into more discrete locations in terms of speakers, a lot of times we get more clarity of those things. And there's different reasons for that, but part of it is we're basically just not making the speaker work as hard. In a studio environment where we're hopefully using high quality speakers, how noticeable that is going to vary. But on a consumer side, it could make a difference. One of the things I notice when I put stuff into the center channel is I feel like I get a little bit more punch, especially with things like drums. It's a little more clarity, but just overall, the impact of things, drums, vocals, there's a little more. It's subtle sometimes, but just feels like those things, I don't know, maybe they stand up a little more in the mix, stand out a little more in the mix. I think you have to experiment to see what you think it sounds like. You might not even hear a difference. Maybe I'm crazy. Wouldn't be the first time. What about the cons of the center channel? Well, the big one, I think, for a lot of engineers is sometimes it just sounds weird. We've gotten very used to working in stereo and working with a phantom center image in our mixes, and we've gotten very used to the artifacts that come with that. Yes, there are artifacts. A phantom center image is not perfect. The way that the phantom center image works in the first place is we have the same sound arriving at both of our ears at the same time. That is a big part of how we perceive where something is located. It's based on the time arrival of a sound to each of our ears. That's not the only part of how that works, but it is a big part. And in my opinion, it is probably the biggest part of what makes us hear something coming from a certain point in space. So we get that same arrival at each ear at the same time. But that's not all each ear is hearing, because if I have a speaker here and a speaker here generating the same sounds, I'm hearing it arrive from this side in this ear at one time, and the speaker over here, it's arriving at this ear a little later. When we have the same source out of time, we get little bits of comb filtering, phase cancellation, destructive interference, however you want to call it so that you understand what this is. Comb filtering is what probably a lot of guys think of. When we move something from phantom center to the center channel, in the center channel, we're actually hearing that source in a more pure kind of sound. We're really hearing it more the way it actually is. We can get sort of the same purity of sound if we put something in just the right speaker or just the left speaker. But we're used to hearing these things so much in the center with that phantom center image and the artifacts of that. When we switch it over to being this kind of pure sound, especially on things like a vocal for me, snare drums, sort of some of the same stuff. When you flip it over to that, sometimes it sounds kind of weird. And trying to work that way, it takes adjustment. So sometimes moving to the center channel instead of the phantom center, that's one of the reasons why we might not want to do it. Maybe we want to stick with what we're used to because we were getting good results before. One of the other cons I should mention with the center channel, and this is more on the artist and kind of label side of things, to me it's a little silly, and I'll explain why in a minute, but basically, some people don't want this kind of naked, sort of available source in that center channel. For example, a vocal. If the center channel is mainly just the vocal, it's not that hard to rip just the vocal out of a mix that way. So some artist labels, they don't want to make it easy to kind of get their vocal out of there. This idea is a little silly because I've probably got 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or who knows how many plugins in my library these days. If I want to strip out a center vocal from a mix, I could get it. And if I have access to that, just about anybody else can have access to that. So that's the technology that's out there these days. If you think about some of the technology that they've been using on old Beatles recordings for upmixing to Atmos, or, you know, like the Let It Be documentary, there's stuff out there. If people want to strip your vocal out, they can get it. I mean, that's just the age we are in these days. I don't think that's the best reason to choose to not use a center channel, but if somebody asked me not to use a center channel, I wouldn't use it. I'm not going to die on that hill. Now, where I fall on the sort of debate about using the center channel, I've gone back and forth. When I was in Nashville last spring talking to a lot of engineers, I had kind of gone away from the center channel because, you know, hearing those guys talk about things and trying some things in my studio, I had moved away from it, but I'm sort of going back towards the center channel now because for me, the imaging, it's just better and more powerful. And I feel like I'm getting more and more used to the center channel the more I work on it. I found some old interviews with Bob Clearmountain from when he first started working in surround. And he talked in some of these interviews about how the center channel sounded weird. And now I see him talking in interviews about Atmos about how much he really likes the center channel. So I think some of it is you just have to get used to it. Maybe you just need to force yourself. But there's some other sort of considerations with the center channel that I want to show you some things with. And that's in regards to folding things down to smaller channel formats, like moving from Atmos into a fixed channel format like 5.1 or just stereo. So let's hop into Pro Tools and take a look at some things. I have a couple of test tones up here. It's just a 1K tone. We're not going to listen to this because it would be horrible, but want to look at what happens with some levels when we start messing around with center-oriented stuff. So I have a signal that is being sent to the center channel of the bed right now, and I have the same sort of signal test tone being sent to basically a phantom center. And the first thing I want you to look at is over here, this is our levels on the bed right now. And then over here, this is the stereo re-render. Basically, it's the 2-channel fold down from the Atmos renderer. I'm bringing it back into Pro Tools right now, and we can meter it. What I can see right here, right off the bat, is the pan law folding down. It looks like it's -3 because I've got a -17 signal here, and we're at -20 here. So 3 dB pan law. I'm not going to get too deep into pan law today. Maybe that'll be a topic for another time. Now, if I switch over to the phantom center, right away I can see, so in the bed, we've gone down to -20 because of that 3 dB pan law. And over on our fold down, nothing has changed. That's a good thing. That means we can put stuff in the center channel and it will fold down to stereo, which is probably the lowest format we fold down Atmos to at this point. Personally, right now, I've been liking taking the fold down and mastering it for stereo release. I had a few songs I did last year where that was how I got the stereo mix for it. So this is helpful to know. Where things get a little stranger in the fold down, though, is when we start playing with things like divergence and size, and when we start bringing things off the wall. And I want to show you what happens with the levels in the fold down when we do that. First of all, let's talk about divergence. Divergence basically controls how discrete our signal is going to be in a speaker. This control comes from, earlier days of theatrical sound mixing where they had these big theaters, and as you would get off to one side of the theater versus the other side, you might sort of lose the sound a little bit. The divergence gave the mixer the ability to sort of put some of that signal into those other speakers along the front. And if I start dialing down the divergence, you can see in the bed that we're getting a little more level into the left and right. And I know some Atmos engineers, they like using this divergence control to kind of spread their signal out across the front. But look what is happening in the fold down. We're not getting that pan law. As we adjust the divergence, the center, it came down a little bit. It came down about 0.5 dB, but we've gone up a couple of dB here. So the thing you have to consider with using something like a divergence control is it's not necessarily going to fold down to stereo the same. For things that are panned in the center, you're playing with the divergence, your balance in that fold down might change. And maybe it'll change in a way that you like. Maybe it'll change in a way that you don't. That's up for you to decide. But be aware that this kind of thing is going to be happening. Now, if I go to completely zero divergence, we have the same level all across the fronts, but we've actually come up 3 dB in our stereo fold down. So in the room, it's probably going to feel like the level doesn't change much. But in the stereo fold down, a 3 dB bump is going to be audible. So keep that in mind. Another control that gets used a bunch by some engineers is the size control. Size, basically, it just puts it into more speakers. Now, if we start turning the size up, we will start hearing it louder in the room. And again, we're going to see more level on the stereo, but it's not necessarily going to correlate to what the actual level is. In other words, again, translation. This might not fold down exactly the way you want it to. Now, another thing to think about is if I've got this in the center and I start pulling it towards the back, again, watch what's happening. We're staying in the middle. As we pull it more into the room off the wall, we're getting level into the sides. But look at what's happening to our signal in the fold down. And I've only come, 20 on the panner. So we've gone from 100. If I go to 80, we've got 2.5 dB of gain of that. As we come further back, we're getting even more loss. Now, here you can see it's going down, but the way this all folds down, it's not necessarily always going to feel like the same balance. So does that mean you shouldn't bring things off the wall? You shouldn't use divergence? You shouldn't use size? Well, no, of course not. There are cases for using these controls. That's why they exist. To me, this is just something to be aware of. If you are thinking about how things are going to fold down, if you are concerned about how things are going to fold down, for me, I am concerned about how things are going to fold down because I like using the stereo re-render for my stereo mix. I'm also thinking more long-term. If Atmos becomes a more default format at some point, a lot of people, they might be hearing that stereo fold down more than they're hearing something like a binaural. In headphones, hopefully they'd hear the binaural, but with car audio, how's that going to work? Stuff to think about. Anyways, just some thoughts on the center channel. I hope that gives you some things to think about. Love to hear, what is your opinion on using the center channel? Are you using it in mixes? Are you using the stereo fold down for stereo mixes? What's working for you? Let me know below. I'd love to hear. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.